made it to Friday the 13th, Part 4, or Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which we all know is a lie because there's several more of these. So the previous ones, the first three, came out in succession in 1980, 81, 82. There was no Friday the 13th movie in 1983, so this one came out in 1984, peak 80s. If you were alive during that time, this movie, everything about it is peak 80s. There is quite a shift from the early 80s to the mid 80s and late 80s. And this movie, the look, everything about it is quintessential 80s. This one, again, takes place right after the end of the last movie. So although it is 1984, we're still just right after the events of what happened in the other movies. So basically there has been a murderous spree with this guy out from the second one to the third one to this one. He has in succession killed a lot of people, and the police still don't seem to be looking for him that hard. So granted, this one starts when he's in the morgue. They think he's dead. I mean, they took his pulse. We all know Jason probably has some supernatural powers at this point because he keeps dying. People check his pulse, and then he comes back for another movie. Everything is still all over the news, and people are still coming and living around the lake, but this one has the explanation of people think he's dead this time. But I counter that with the fact that almost immediately Jason's body disappears from the morgue, and two people from the hospital are missing because Jason likes to hide bodies sometimes. So that would lead you to believe that the cops should be looking into what has happened. There's two people missing from the hospital. Jason's body is gone. Even if they think those two people stole his body, shouldn't they be looking for these people? Shouldn't something be happening? Several people have died by now. But I digress. What are you going to do? It is a Friday the 13th movie. This is what Friday the 13th does. So we are still near Crystal Lake in this one. And it's not a camp setting again. It is a group of young friends are renting a house for their lake weekend this summer. And I think we all know where this will go. Also living on the lake is single mother Mrs. Jarvis and her two children, Tommy Jarvis and Trish Jarvis. Just happily oblivious, living near Crystal Lake, where a slew of homicides have happened in the last few weeks, where several teenage to 21-year-old people have gotten killed, but they're just living life, oblivious to anything that has happened. They're like, hey, this is our lake. We're going to have some teenagers next door, renting the cabin next door. It's fine. Act like nothing has happened around them. Trish is like the Jarvis teenage daughter. Tommy is like the 12-year-old little brother who likes making horror masks, really into that genre, and making like effects makeup. He makes very realistic masks. This one I like to refer to as the first very horny Friday the 13th film. Yes, there has been sex in the other ones, a little bit of nudity, although they played it up at the time like it was a lot of nudity. I really don't think it is. There are sex scenes, but the sex scenes are not graphic at all. But this one has to be, so far on the rewatch of all these, the horniest of all of them, where if they're not having sex. The kids are talking about sex the whole time. It's like it's ramped up for the mid-80s. We have a new director in this Jason movie. Director Joseph Zito is taking over the reins for this one, which notes that there's a little bit of change of style and tone of the look of this movie as well. That goes along with it being made in the mid-80s instead of the late 80s, and a new director with a different style from the person that directed the previous two. Well, basically, even though Steve Miner directed two of them, but I always think he was always trying to direct them in this style of the first one. And this probably stands out because of the cast of this film. If they didn't become very famous after this film, there are a lot of known people where you're like, wait a minute, I've seen them somewhere before. A lot of the people in this Jason movie are still working actors. And yes, little Tommy Jarvis is played by Corey Feldman. The Corey Feldman. The two Corys Corey Feldman. This is right before he became huge child star Corey Feldman. Up until this point, Corey Feldman was a working child actor. Most of his roles were in TV series and TV movies at this point. So he makes this Jason movie, and then I believe the next movie to come out that he's in is Gremlins. And of course, in 1985, a year after this movie comes out, he's in Goonies. And then the year after that, Stand By Me, and picture after picture that cemented him as a child star of the 80s and early 90s. Probably the next best known actor in this movie is Crispin Glover, who at this point, like Corey Feldman, did a lot of guest starring roles on TV. He had just made the movie Racing with the Moon, the one with Sean Penn and Nicolas Cage and Elizabeth Montgomery. And then he went on to do this movie. And basically in this movie, he is one of the horny college age kids. I think we all know that probably his most famous role is playing George McFly in Back to the Future, that came out the year after this movie. And Crispin Glover for several years had this weird persona. He kicked David Letterman on air during the show. One time got banned from the David Letterman show. He had a quirky personality, but he is still a working actor today. If you see him today, it's hard to believe that he was such this nerdy, dorky, teenage actor back in the day, because he's looking pretty good in mid-age. And then we have other people where they're not really known by name, but they have those faces where you're like, I know that person. I've seen them recently. One is Erich Anderson. He plays the hitchhiker who camps in the woods and helps the Jarvis family out. He's been in several things throughout the years, and unfortunately he passed away recently. But you see him as guest starring on a lot of TV shows. He's like a character actor. You see him pop up in a lot of things. Just a lot of the actors in this movie have those familiar faces where you've seen them in more than just this. And a lot of them, even though they're not big names, they are working actors. Which is a little bit different from the previous movies where you only had Kevin Bacon that you had seen since Friday the 13th. And this is another one filmed in California. Not the same place in California, not the same sets or anything like that. It is filmed on and around the California area, but they use a real lake this time. But it's obviously not the same place. Different houses, different everything is used, different woods and everything like that. But another one filmed in California for the proximity to the studio, which these are still produced by Paramount. And these still are low budget movies. They're made for less than $3 million still at this point. And it's still making money with this one. Still made almost $33 million on that $3-ish million budget. So at this point, it's still worth it to make these movies to the studio because it's making a lot of money for them. And these movies always come in at a tight 125 to 140 minutes. They know the formula, they do the formula. There's going to be a beginning with a flashback to previous movie. There's going to be long credits that are done simply. This is returned to the black background with the white credits that take up a lot of the runtime in the beginning of the movie. And then we're going to introduce you to the young people, and then Jason is somehow going to come back and kill a lot of people. And then seemingly be killed at the end, just to magically come back for another movie. Like I said before, this movie is going to play up the sexuality by talking about it more. These are horny teenagers, and there's a 12-year-old boy who, you know, does what 12-year-old boys do. 12-year-old boys are kind of pervy. And Corey Feldman's Tommy is no different, except he's a little dorky because he likes to make masks. And was this movie any better received by critics than the other ones? No. They all thought it was trash, just like the other ones, even though the third one had a little bit of, you know, the critics praising it just for its use of 3D. This one is not in 3D. Roger Ebert called it an immoral and reprehensible piece of trash, if that paints a picture of how this one was received. And again, spoiler alert, but like I've said before, these movies came out 40 years ago, so it's really not my fault if I'm spoiling this for anyone. So Tommy, this is the first time where there is not actually a final girl in this film. There are two survivors by the end of this, Tommy and his sister, and Tommy is the one that kills Jason in a brutal fashion. He's a little creepy too because he shaves his head to fool Jason, kind of like in the same vein that they do at the end of number 2, where he makes Jason think he's bringing Jason back to his childhood, the bald, young, disfigured kid. And the way that Corey Feldman kills him in a violent rage, if you know anything about Corey Feldman, he looks like he is working things out when he butchers Jason in this movie. He probably did have a lot of things to work out, take some rage out into things that happened to him. And then he gives the most evil look to camera at the end. But I want to go on saying that Corey Feldman was such a good child actor. And watching this movie just brings you back to the fact of how good Corey Feldman was as a child actor. He has no right to be as good as he is in a Friday the 13th movie. He is by far the best actor in this movie. As far as what I think of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, it is a decent Jason movie. It is near the top of the pack as I'm concerned. So my favorite, and it's nice rewatching these because I haven't actually sat down and watched these in a long time, watch them. I think I've said before in other videos, I've had them on in the background, sitting down, watching them, really paying attention to what's happening in the movies and everything, because I probably haven't done that since the 80s or 90s. And so far, the rewatch, I like number 1 the best, and then probably number 3 and number 4 And then number 2, I've made my feelings about number 2 known, that I did not like that at all. But that's how it's shaping up so far to be. But join me next time where we talk about Jason 5, Friday the 13th 5, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. So see you next time. And if you don't know, my name is Stacia. I am just a girl on the internet that likes to talk about movies. And for the Halloween spooky season, I am going through the first 10 Jason movies, all the way from the first one to the 10th one. But if you like stuff like this, please subscribe to my channel. My goal is to get to 500 subscribers by the end of this year, and I am within shooting distance of that. So if you'd like to help me get that goal, subscribe. And it also helps when you comment on the videos. I love your guys' comments. I try to reply to all of them if I can. But again, my name is Stacia. Thank you for watching. Bye.